Hello, I hope you're taking care of yourself. If you're new here, my name is Lexi. A little while ago, I asked the loyal squadron of people who follow me on Instagram, despite the fact that I never post on there, if they could give me some requests for some super specific book recommendations that they're looking to see. And that's what we're doing today. I'm gonna take all of those unhinged responses from my Instagram DMs, and I'm going to provide you with some equally unhinged book recommendations, just for your viewing pleasure, just to have and to hold as the weather begins to get cooler this fall. We're gonna try to go as fast as possible, but I hate shutting up, so we'll see how that goes. A book with feminine rage. This one's really easy because I'm not actually sure that there's a recommendation for this prompt that's better in like a platonic sense than Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. Disclaimer, this is a book that will not work for everybody. Like, it's beyond deranged. But before I read it, the thing that intrigued me enough to pick this book up was that I heard it described as like a for the girls version of Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. And honestly, that captures the vibe of this book better than anything that I could possibly say to you right now. So if that sounds interesting to you, if that sounds like literature, you're probably going to love this. The main character of this book sucks as a person. She's the worst. She's probably one of the least likable characters in any book that I've read in my entire life, but that's kind of the point, and it's really effective. And I think that this book just contributes some interesting ideas to the discourse that's around feminine rage, but also like what it takes to be perceived as a threat as a woman. A book that gives true Virgo energy. If it's not completely obvious to you already by everything that I do, and also just my general demeanor and the way that I look at the world, I am in fact a Virgo. I just turned 23 it was my birthday on September 8th, and I'm an expert on this, and I can tell you that the most Virgo book I've read in my entire life, like bar none, it's unparalleled, is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I also have a copy of this that is just conspicuously missing. I'm not exactly sure where I put it when I was moving because I remember getting it back from a friend, but nobody cares. It's beside the point. I care, actually. It's like quadruple annotated, so if I don't find it, I'm gonna have to like rob someone. But in my executive opinion, it's like the most Virgo romance I've seen in my entire life. It's a book that's written by and for the anxiety-ridden control freak girlies for whom the devil is most definitely in the details, and I absolutely loved it. I mean, obviously, like that's me. And I do think it's also a book for the more generalized, older sibling, burnt out gifted kid, very ambitious and proud of it, but also half of it is definitely to cope because you kind of don't believe you deserve anything that you've ever achieved in your entire life. If that's you, this book is also a romance for your people. It's enemies to lovers. It's between this literary agent and this editor at a big publishing house who are forced to work together on a project, and it's just a great time. It's one of my like exalted chosen favorite romance novels for sure. A book that hugs my upcoming seasonal depression. So this was probably my top request by vibe, I think. Just something cozy, a comfort read, a book that makes you feel like getting a hug, something like that. And I don't see this book talked about very often on social media, but it's absolutely one of my biggest comfort reads personally, and that is Iona Iverson's Guide for Commuting. This is a book that's about a bunch of British people who have the same commute on this train every single day, but they never talk because it's weird to talk to people on the train, and why would you do that? But the tension finally breaks when one of the guys who's running the train every day just starts choking on a grape, and everybody has to come together to help him. And this book is just this really beautiful story of friendship across the lifespan as all of these people just kind of start meddling in each other's lives. The main character, Iona, is an older woman. She's been through a lot in her life. She's kind of like a retired it-girl Evelyn Hugo type beat character, and she's sassy and she's funny and she gives good advice, and I want to be her when I grow up. And I just feel like this description does not properly capture the sacred truth that this is just the ultimate feel-good book, in my opinion. It's just the kind of book where you're having a really fun time and it's not that serious until you realize that actually it's incredibly serious because life is a big deal even when it's all about the small deals, and then suddenly you're crying and you're like, how did I end up here? It's just a really good time. A book for someone who just started full-time work after college and can't survive under capitalism. Or in a different font, a book to cure the existential crisis of a final year university student with zero plans or ambitions. I actually got like 5 different requests that were very similar to that. You know, what can I say? I'm a woman of the people, okay? I also don't know what's going on with my life. I also feel crippling dread about society randomly and for extended periods of time. You know, it's just a shared experience, I guess, that we all have. I'll be the first to say I haven't found anything that has like cured me, but I do have 2 books that I hope will help you. The first one is 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals, which I maintain is the only not bad self-help book. Disclaimer that I've read or been exposed to. Who knows? Like there could be a million wonderful self-help books out there that I have not yet seen, but I like this book because it's kind of subversive in that most self-help books are like, here's how to form the 8 essential habits that you need to be the baddest possible bitch. Here's how to work out for 3 hours every day and eat healthy meals and get ripped and shit on the memory of your ex who was stinky anyways. And books like that in the moment can be motivating to read, but at least my experience is that when I'm done and then go on to rot again and do nothing in my bed for a week, I just end up hating myself even more than before I read the book. That's not good. That's not an experience I seek in literature. But this book is really different. It is self-help, but it's self-help through being anti-self-help, if that makes sense. Instead of taking the route of telling you how to do everything all of the time more effectively, this book book absolutely like dunks on productivity culture and completely dismantles the idea that I definitely have. I mean, I feel like a lot of people in my generation who were told that they were smart in school definitely have, that we need to be doing things all the time and we need to be on top of everything all of the time, because if we are, then that makes us successful. Because at the end of the day, that's an imaginary idea. Like, we invented that, you know, like there's nothing intrinsic to our value that is dependent on what we're able to create. And it doesn't have to be that way, you know, like this book draws a lot on classic philosophy and history and things that, again, you don't really see very much in self-help books. And it just makes a really effective case for like being nicer to yourself and doing less, which I like. But if you're like allergic to philosophy or self-help, which fair, you know, I would understand that. My other recommendation for you is The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green, which is an essay collection that I liked a lot more than any of the YA that I read by him when I was growing up. And it's just a really thoughtful look at a bunch of small parts of John's life and how he perceives his relationships with himself, his family, his friends, and life, like conceptually, through the sum of all of those little things that he experiences all of the time. And it's honestly the kind of book that made me like a more thankful person without being preachy at all. Like, it's very down to earth. So yeah, those are my recs for that. I don't really have anything that's going to cure you. What you're experiencing right now is a result of the long con of every teacher that you've had in your entire life. Because ultimately, like, do we just live in a society where a bunch of things are imaginary and very stressful? Yes, we do. But we also live in a society where we have to treat those things as being real in order to like survive and function and not starve to death or freeze. So yeah, if you figure out how to be cool with that, please let me know. I would love to learn. But for now, I hope that those books are helpful. Something folklore heavy and atmospheric that's not fae. I loved Bear and the Nightingale. Yet another easiest recommendation of my life. I would give you Sorcery of Thorns. This is a YA fantasy book that is at its core just a love letter to libraries and to growing up as a reader. It takes place in this world where books are like sentient, and the main character, Elizabeth, has to go on this journey after one of the most powerful magical books in her library ends up escaping, or is possibly abetted in escaping. And she has to go find it before bad things start happening out in the world. It's kind of like a magical light academia vibe, and it's incredibly atmospheric, but without being boring. Like, the plot is still incredibly fast-paced, and the characters are all to die for. Like, they're so much fun. Silas in that book? Slay. What a guy. A book for folklore and bewitched girlies. So this request is related, obviously, to the last one, but I feel like it had a subtly different tone, and I'm taking this opportunity to give you perhaps a slightly more unhinged recommendation under this vibe, which is House of Hollow. This is YA fantasy horror, and it's definitely like the goth angry older sister of Sorcery of Thorns, if you're into that. The book is about this mysterious trio of sisters who are all just kind of weird in a twisted fairy tale way. They have like insane appetites all of the time. Their hair is white. They have this weird identical scar, all of them on their necks. And they've only been weird like this ever since they went missing together when they were young for like a month and then came back, but none of them could remember what had happened to them when they were gone. And the actual events of this book start after the oldest sister, who kind of always seemed to know a little bit more about what was going on with their disappearance, she goes missing, and it's up to the two younger sisters to figure out what happened to her, which requires them to dig into their past. Once again, this is super atmospheric. It's very fall, very getting colder, very getting crazy, leaves are changing and so am I kind of energy. And it's just such a creative story. Like, I'd never read anything like this before or since. And even if you don't typically like young adults, like, this is still worth it, in my opinion. It's really, really dark. There are parts of this book that had me like gasping for air with how weird that they were. And overall, it's also just such a compelling picture of sisterhood and of sacrifice. Really, really good, really witchy, really fall, really, you should read this. Something as lyrical and sentimental as Minsky lyrics. I have a lot to say for this one. First of all, I'm a big Minsky fan. I'm something of a Minsky enjoyer, if you will. I just love a profoundly sad woman who sings songs at the intersection of indie alternative and folk rock. You know, every single woman like that, she's my best friend. And off the jump, I've actually heard this book, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, as a book that has been described as for Minsky enjoyers. But I have not personally actually read this yet, so I'm gonna give you like 3 more recommendations of books that I have read, so that way I can feel like I'm substantially and enthusiastically answering your question. But in terms of sentimentality and lyricism and things like that, I do know that this book is supposed to be written by a poet as a letter to his mother, and I have heard time and time again that it's just absolutely beautiful. So I can't not spread the good word of this book, considering that it's literally been described to me as an answer to your prompt. But moving on, in terms of books that I actually have read, my first rec, based purely on vibes, is Her Body and Other Parties. My copy of this book that I've annotated, by the way, which I don't do very often, is I think with a friend right now. At least I hope so, because I don't know where it went. But this book is absolutely brilliant. It's a collection of feminist horror short stories that I think has the same tortured energy as Minsky does in most of the songs that she does. And the collection also reckons with how difficult it is to be a woman in a way that's correct, with the same kind of artsy, abstract abstractness that Minsky has in a lot of her music. So I think you're gonna like it. That's the first recommendation. The second rec, also based purely on vibes, is My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which is a book about a girl who's just like, I hate it here. I'm gonna go take a bunch of drugs and then sleep as much as I possibly can for 1 calendar year and see how much sleep I can chemically induce within myself. I didn't love this book, but I respected its audacity, and I just feel like it captures a very Minsky and Youre experience to want to have. And my last recommendation for Minsky fans, based on themes of a lot of Minsky's catalog, is Minor Feelings. This is a really good essay collection that's about the Asian American experience on one hand, but also about mental health and sisterhood and friendship and how difficult it is to just like exist day by day in this world. And if you resonate a lot with the non-romantic songs in Minsky's catalog about her relationships with race and self-love and mental health and all of that, I think this author captures her experiences in a way that is very similar in tone to a lot of those songs. And she also used to be a poet, so it's really beautiful as well. I think you'll really like this. A book with a complicated character who gives protagonist but unintentionally serves antagonist, aka the bear. So I love this one. This is a trope that I really enjoy in concept that I actually feel like I haven't read in a ton of books, but I just love evil people who I can't help but root for, you know? Like, it makes me feel like I too might be worthy of love. And this is very different from the bear. It's maybe as different as you could possibly get from the bear. But the thing that comes to mind instantly, like the most with that prompt, to me is the Poppy War trilogy, which is a fantasy series that's inspired by the Sino-Japanese War that follows Rin, who is easily one of the best anti-heroes that I've ever read in a book. The choices that she makes sometimes are bananas. Like, frequently they're outright evil, but R.F. Kuang, Rebecca, my idol, does just such a good job of establishing Rin's inner world that you always end up understanding why she does the things that she does, and you still end up rooting for her anyways, despite the fact that, again, she's like low-key pretty evil. And the series just really captures how complicated the world is and history is. And I think that most of its success is off of the back of Rin's strength as the protagonist of the trilogy. So I think you're really gonna like this one. A Sapphic book rec that isn't cliche. So disclaimer, both of these books are sad. I'm not really sure if that's the tone that you're after, but that's what you're gonna receive, okay? I would recommend We Do What We Do in the Dark or In the Dream House. And they're both, let's be clear, about like really bad relationships. Not healthy, not good. But We Do What We Do in the Dark captures really well the do I want to be her or do I want to be with her conundrum that so many people have in general with early relationships in their life, but for queer women specifically getting into their first big relationship, it's a very common feeling. And this book is just a really good, short, literary look at like that exact emotion. And I've yet to read something that captures it quite as well as that book, I think. And In the Dream House is a memoir that's told through these really creative vignettes that all are themed around tropes of classic horror and classic haunted houses. As you can see, the chapters are like really short, and it's like a really creative form for a story. And the book unpacks this abusive relationship that the author had with her ex-girlfriend and her process of recovering from it and then ultimately moving on with the girl who has now become her wife. But it does that again in a way that is just so novel and creative. It's one of my favorite memoirs, and it is just tremendously good. A fantasy with foggy day vibes that will also shatter my heart into a million pieces. So I've talked about this book, Juniper and Thorne, before on this channel, and I'll do it again. This is my favorite fractured fairy tale for sure, which to me is like the definition of foggy day vibes. And the book centrally is about themes of abuse and trauma and recovery from said things. So unless you're evil, there are things in this book that are gonna make you very sad. Plot-wise, it follows this girl who grows up with her sisters under the thumb of their abusive, xenophobic, just generally bad dude father. Practically their entire life, he has never let them leave the house, but one day the sisters all sneak out, and that sets off this chain of events that forces the main character to reckon with everything that she's been through in her life and all of the things that she's been able to survive. Fair warning, the book is fantasy horror with a definite emphasis on horror, I think. And there are things in the book that are very graphic. I would definitely recommend looking up trigger warnings if that's concerning to you, but it's all there for a reason, in my opinion. It's brilliant as a book, and the way that it ends is just very satisfying. A fiction book for men who struggle with feeling knuff. I love this one, okay? You're knuff. Don't let anyone tell you you're not. For you, I think that a good author in general would be Frederick Bachman, but specifically the book that comes to mind for me is A Man Called Uwe, which is about this just very grumpy, curmudgeon-y old man that kind of has nothing to live for after his wife dies, and he hates everyone and yells all the time, but it's kind of a defense mechanism. And the book is about the new relationships that he forms as a result of this new family that moves in next door. And it's just the kind of book, I think, that convinces you that there are people out there in the world who will appreciate you, regardless of who you are or what flaws that you think you have. The book is a little bit of an emotional roller coaster, but thematically, I think it definitely would get the job done for you. And I have two for this, because the other book that I would recommend you is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, which is about this woman named Nora who attempts suicide and ends up waking up in this purgatory space called the Midnight Library, where she can essentially just see the results of any choice that she could have made differently in her entire life. She can like slot into these different existences and see what she could have had, for example, if she kept up with swimming, or if she stayed together with a partner that she vaguely regretted breaking up with. And this book is kind of controversial, not because it's like problematic critic or anything, but because some people really, really love it, and some people think that it's just a really trite and flat depiction of mental health. But I personally am in the camp that loves it, even though I can see where other people are coming from. The story can definitely be heavy-handed with the fact that it's an allegory for mental health, but I remember feeling when I read this that, at least in terms of my personal experience, Matt Haig really got it. Like, it was a very bad time for me in my life. It was not cute. It was not fun. He knew what I was going through in a very real, lived way. And as a result, the kind of like heavy-handed, inspiring parts of the book did end up still really hitting for me. Like, very much. Even when I could see how people could find it cliche, I did not care. I thought that it was a very important thing that I read this book when I did. So yeah, in your shoes, I think that I would give this a try. The fluffiest, swooniest romance for escapism purposes. I believe that we live in a world that has a fluff smut continuum when it comes to romance books. You can find books that have both for sure. I'm not saying those don't exist, but I have found that in my experience, the raunchier that a book is, the less outright fluff that you're gonna see in the plot. So with that in mind, assuming that you're looking for more like escapist fluff, I have two recommendations. The first one is Tokyo Ever After, which is a young adult romance. There's no smut to be seen, but I read this a couple of years ago and I remember just loving it. It's a retelling of The Princess Diaries that follows this girl who thought that her dad abandoned her before she was born, but in reality, it turns out that the entire time he was the crown prince of Japan. And yeah, she has to deal with that. That's the book. But the book is also this forbidden love romance between her and her bodyguard that she gets when her dad flies her out to Japan, who obviously she can never be with. That's her bodyguard. He is not of royal class. And the book is just so wholesome and fun. It gives the same feeling as one of those like top tier classic Disney Channel movies that you loved when you were a kid. There's just no other way of describing it. And next, if you're looking for a very fluffy, fun adult romance, the best one that I've read recently that I think ticks those boxes is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. I've talked about it before because I read it this year and it's just really good, but this is kind of a small town, big city vibe that is a romance between this girl who's a doctor and is the functional heir of her incredibly influential medical family who owns like a million hospitals across the United States, and this very rugged, woodsy man who's the beloved mayor of this small town that the main character ends up running into after she ends up getting a flat tire like somewhere near where he lives, and he stops to help her. There is a little bit of smut down the line, but overwhelmingly it's just very fluffy. High on the vibes of I would drop everything in my life right now to marry the male lead of this book because he's the perfect man. He actually has like no flaws in this book, and every time he does anything, I'm kicking my little feet in the air, which I imagine is probably what you're looking for here, so this is the book for you. A murder mystery, but with a trans main character or a queer cast of characters. So I'm just gonna say off the jump that this is not a murder mystery, but I feel like the overlap between murder mystery enjoyers and stories about cults enjoyers is pretty high, speaking as somebody who is within this overlap. So if you like things with those vibes that are culty, then you should definitely read Hell Followed With Us. This is like a super creative book that takes place in this dystopian world where a religious cult invented and then released a virus that kind of zombifies, but even worse and more gruesome, everybody that gets the virus. And they do this to bring on the apocalypse because of course they do. Let's rapture everybody, you know? It's kind of like that energy. But they have also genetically experimented to create this monster that can control all of these zombies that they're creating with this virus, you know, really just to drive home the whole end of the world thing. And that's our main character, Benji, who's also a trans boy. And as he is starting to turn into this monster, he ends up escaping this cult. And he finds this group of queer kids who are squatting in this community center, just kind of trying to survive and ride out the apocalypse. And they end up taking him in, and it's kind of a found family sort of vibe, but also obviously the cult wants him back, so they're hunting him down. And it's just really good. It's intense. I liked thematically what the story was doing. I felt like it was pretty subversive in interesting ways, and I definitely would recommend it to anybody who finds cults to be fascinating, like I do. A book for someone who's having a quarter-life crisis, just got back into reading mostly sci-fi, and wants a book to cry to. Genuinely, I think I have the perfect book for you. Like, I'm kind of proud of this one, to be honest. But you should definitely read The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. So this book has been a favorite of mine for a really long time, and not to flex, but I have this like beautiful half-illustrated kind of edition. Hello? But this is a book that's about a guy who goes back home to the town where he was raised for a funeral. And while he's there, he's faced with this never-ending stream of memories about all of the crazy things that happened to him when he was a kid. It's more magical realism, kind of light fantasy than it is sci-fi, but it is just such an effective picture of memory, of nostalgia and regret, and the fear I think that a lot of us have that we're done growing up now that we're adults. We're done being kids. We're done deserving the grace that you give the children in your life now that we're older. And we just have to exist in this world now, which is scary. I cry whenever I return to this book, okay? Like, is it psychopathic to say that I hope you cry too? Probably. Maybe it is, but I do. Like, I hope that it's really cathartic for you as a read if you decide to pick it up. Something to fill a post-tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow void that reads easy, addictively, and intellectual. Obligatory, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is my favorite book. Obligatory, I love this. Obligatory, if you haven't read this book and you're watching one of my videos, then you should fix this immediately before you do anything else in your life right now, okay? Okay. Before my fellow traveler in this world who's trying to fill the just absolute hole that that book leaves in your heart. I feel like this is cheating a little bit because it's by the same author, but the only book for you here, in my opinion, is The Storied Life of A.J. Fickery. The vibes are functionally identical in terms of like writing style and whimsy and being set in and about an interesting thing. Like, this is a bookstore instead of a video game company, but it's automatically a really fun setting to read about. I also gave this book 5 stars. It wasn't like quite as hard-hitting and memorable to me as Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, but it's that same thoughtful portrait of the close relationships that you have with the people in your life and just how those change and develop over time. Like, that's also done well in this book. So if you like Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, I really do feel like you will almost certainly also have a really good time reading this book. I feel pretty confident giving you that recommendation, but I don't know what to do after that. If you find out, let me know. It would be wonderful to have that kind of experience, like even one more time in my life. A book that makes me look intelligent while studying literature in Italy. So the obvious answer here is a classic, especially since you're a literature student. But to be so honest with you, I haven't read a classic in a very long time. For the record, I'm not anti-classics. Like, I think that's stupid to be kind of reverse elitist against classics. I think that's equally dumb to people who like classics being elitist against people who like other genres. I think elitism is just stupid as a whole. But I just get bored so easily with books that are written with an older English vernacular. They just require a lot of brain cells to get through, and I frequently do not have very many to spare by the time I'm sitting down to read a book. In case in point, Charles Dickens burned me out on reading for like 4 years after I read A Tale of Two Cities in high school. And I fully intend on trying again with them eventually as an adult. Like, I think that there are a lot of classics I would really enjoy, but I can't recommend you any of them because I don't know anything about classic literature. So instead, I would go the hot person route of reading either an essay collection or a short story collection in public if you want to seem mysterious and also have a really good time and learn a lot. I don't think I've ever seen an unattractive person at a coffee shop reading Trick Mirror. You know, it's the kind of thing that just automatically makes you look hip and intellectual. Very important things for your study abroad experience. Currently, my favorites of both genres are The Office of Historical Corrections and Girlhood, both of which I've actually talked about on my channel before, but they both just go really hard. In addition to making you look hot, you're gonna have a good time. You're gonna learn a lot. You're gonna have a little think. If you want something that captures the complicated experience of being a woman in today's world, if you're looking for like Barbie movie core, but a little bit more complex, you should pick up Girlhood. It will astound you. And if you want fiction that's at the intersection of race, class, and gender, but is also very creative, concise, and snappy, then you should pick up The Office of Historical Corrections. This book will change you at an atomic level. They're both just really good. A short story anthology, but in one shared universe. Sci-fi, horror, or fantasy. So disclaimer, this is not an anthology, which is what you wanted, and yet here we are. But I can't not take the opportunity to recommend you How High We Go in the Dark, which is a short story collection that I very rarely find a reason to bring up because it's honestly just a pretty weird book, but it is so good, and I think that you'll like it based kind of on what you're looking for, even though it's all by one author. The book is an interconnected collection of short stories that all take place in the same universe, but with entirely different characters depending on the story. They're all about this version of Earth where, because of climate change, this really old virus that had died off during the Ice Age is released from a glacier. And really broadly, the book is about everything that happens as a direct result of that and how many different types of people cope with the new reality that is formed as a result. I can't not acknowledge the fact that it's kind of COVID energy. I honestly feel really bad for this book because it was released so soon to when COVID happens. Like, it's hard for it to be completely its own thing, but I really think it is. For example, the virus is very different in concept because it's the worst in children. It has by far the highest mortality rate with people like under the age of 12 or something. So generationally, what that does to the society that's in this book is really interesting. And yeah, the whole thing is pretty hardcore climate science fiction. And outside of everything to do with the virus, there's a lot of themes that center around technology and singularity and like space travel and just a bunch of stuff. I mean, the stories feel very broad in tone in the same way that I think an anthology does, even though it's all by, again, the same author. But even with that, every story individually feels like very close and personal to whoever the narrator is at that point. Like, I cried a few different times reading different stories in this collection. I'm not too ashamed to admit it. It's just really good, and I feel like I never have a reason to talk about it, so I'm kind of forcing it into this recommendation. A creepy toe-curling thriller with a good romance subplot. Prefer rivals to lovers. Okay, stay with me here. I would definitely recommend you None Shall Sleep. This is not exactly a romance subplot, but honestly, I can't think of any thrillers that have one that didn't make me cringe. And also, I feel like the seeds are planted with this, kind of, if you know, you know, and like the banter and overall vibes, just, it's indescribable, but it gives you the same kind of dopamine that I think you would get from the book that you're looking for. It's here. It's also in this one. This is a young adult thriller that's about this girl, Emma, who was the final girl, like only survivor of a serial killer however many years ago. And it takes place in the 1980s. It's kind of like Mindhunter energy at that era because she's recruited by the FBI to go and interview interview serial killers and do like criminal psychology, even though she's also a teenager. Don't worry about it, you know, like that part of the book is never going to make any sense at all, but I cannot tell you enough how little I cared. Because she's working alongside this guy named Travis to do all of these things. He's kind of her reluctant partner in crime. Like, they don't really like each other initially, they have some beef, you know how it is. But the most compelling part of this book is that Emma ends up having to complete several interviews with this other teenager whose name is Simon. And Simon refuses to talk to anybody other than Emma, and he's also this just big, prolific serial killer. It gives Silence of the Lambs. It gives Hannibal Lecter in a big way, but again, they're teenagers and it's kind of like pulpy drama because Simon has a copycat killer on the outside, and the FBI thinks but does not know for sure that he is somehow involved with this, despite, again, actively being incarcerated. And it's up to Emma to figure out what's going on. This book is pretty insane, especially for YA. I feel like a lot of the YA I've talked about in this video has been all of like the weird dark things that I read. I mean, I think that that's typically what sticks out in the genre for me. There are parts of this book that are legitimately disturbing, just really creepy. And in terms of vibes, I just think that you'll have a really good time with it. The perfect fall vibes book that isn't paranormal, but has some sort of romance in it. I also got a lot of requests for things with fall vibes, and I think that a lot of the books, honestly, on this list so far have been fall energy, but here's something specifically for what you're looking for. And I just talked about this mere moments ago in my wrap up, but I'm beginning my endless crusade probably of promoting this book because I just think it's really good and deserves a lot of hype. You should read You Again. First of all, look at the cover. Like, it's giving fall, it's giving autumn, it's giving leaves falling on the ground. And the book is a modernized retelling of the quintessential fall rom-com, When Harry Met Sally, which is a really high bar for it to set for itself considering the fact that that's a perfect movie, but the book is really good. It's about a girl and a guy who meet for the first time when they find out that they've been sleeping with the same woman, and they just immediately kind of dislike each other. It's vaguely antagonistic from the jump. And they continue running into each other throughout the years, kind of like feuding every single time until finally they become friends in the wake of their own individual respective breakups. And the book is so funny. The characters are kind of just outright bad people, which I think takes a lot of courage from an author to pull off. And it's really just a hot cup of coffee on a 55-degree day, sitting on a park bench outside and watching the leaves fall, and they're all red and orange and yellow, and it's immaculate energy, and you're looking at all like the little dogs that are walking next to you, and you wish that you brought gloves, but you're too proud to go back to your apartment, so you're just gonna sit there and read your little book. This is the book that you're reading in this scene. And that's specific, but it's just really good, and I really hope that it gets the attention that it deserves. And that's it. That's all I'm doing for this video. If you're looking for more books for each kind of recommendation, or maybe you've already read the book that I recommended in this video, really recommend leaving a comment. Maybe somebody down there will be able to help you find something that you're looking for to scratch the same itch, especially if again, you've already read the book that I'm recommending. And if you like this video, the best way that you can show that to me is by liking it, literally, on YouTube, and also dropping me a subscription. I would love to have you sticking around. We do a lot of cool things on this channel. We read a lot of books. We try not to fall prey to the existential dread that's slowly consuming me every waking hour of every single day. And we do that together. Yup, it's a good time. But yeah, that's everything. Bye.